What's going on, guys? Hope this video finds you well, and welcome to somewhat of a different style of video than I'm used to making. Today, the plan is going to be to discuss the Yakuza Kiryu Saga, also known as Yakuza 0, in this case Kiwami, Kiwami 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Even though, as many of you may know, Kiryu does show up in some later games, I think just kind of discussing this set of games makes a lot of sense, considering this was his stretch of being the main protagonist. Also, unlike my usual videos, I am here today with a special guest, Space Cowboy EXZ. Say hello to the people.
Good morning, world. This is the Space Cowboy, not coming from the interplanetary good vibe zone. Today we are coming from Cobra HQ with my good buddy, Mr. Cobra.
That's right.
AKA Cobra Codex. How we doing?
Good. How are you, man?
I am fantastic.
I think first and foremost, the main thing to talk about is where to start when it comes to Yakuza, because this is a very overbearing series. There's lots of entries, lots of spin-offs. New entries seem to be coming out multiple times a year these days. Somewhere around like the middle of last year, I decided it was time to finally dive in. I had owned most of these games on Steam for a while, just haven't had the chance to play them. And I started with 0 because that is largely the most suggested starting point, I would say, in the fandom, or at least one of them, considering I don't have access to the original 1 and 2 on PS2. So I did kind of the standard order of 0, Kiwami, Kiwami 2, then going back to 3, 4, 5, and 6 in that order. I can break down my playtime and completion types of stuff, but as I pull that up, Space Cowboy, why don't you give the rundown of your experience with this series, because I know you've been playing these games for quite a bit longer than I have.
Yes, so I am more familiar with the series. I have been familiar with the series since it blew up with the release of 0. Now, of course, I also need to mention myself that I did not play the original 2 games, the first and second Yakuza games on the PS2 back in the day, mostly because there was no way in hell I was going to get access to those games in my local store. I don't think they had those there. I also picked up on 0, Kiwami, Kiwami 2, so on and so forth, and I also played some of the other spin-offs as well. But some people do have a little whiplash with some of the games, at least as far as like the remakes, then going back to the remasters of 3 to 5.
We can get into it a little bit later. It is kind of a shame that the first 2 games haven't been made accessible, which I guess you can see with a number of games that have been remade, like Resident Evils and other series, where it's hard to get access to the original games, but to not spend too much time on that. So you started with 0, right? I think that's what you mentioned.
You know what, actually, excuse me, sorry. I started with Kiwami first, and then got 0.
Gotcha. It's usually between those two for best starting point. If you have access to either or both of them, you can't really go wrong. 0 released originally after 5 came out, so I think now as someone who's played 0 through 6, for lack of a better way to explain that, I feel like I would actually get more out of 0 playing it now with the context of the other games, because that's kind of the environment it was made in. But I don't think there's anything wrong with starting with 0 necessarily. Now, for people at home who are concerned about how long these games can take, if you wanted to basically live in pretty much any one of these games and play it for years and years and years, you definitely could. There's tons of mini games in each and every one of these, and I think that's what makes it overbearing for some people. On the completionist side of things, I wouldn't personally recommend it, but I've also not done a lot of the completion-oriented stuff, just because there's like so much. I'll give my playtime on each of these games before having gone back to clean up some side stuff, which I did do in each of these. So Yakuza 0 took me around 25 hours-ish, and I did a decent amount of the side stuff. Still plenty more to do there, because 0 might be one of the most jam-packed as far as side content is concerned. Kiwami 1 was also around 25 hours, but I did more of the side stuff. Quite a few of the random encounter Majima kinds of things, primarily. Kiwami 2 I spent about 20 hours with, did a decent amount of side stuff, mostly grinding stat bonuses and stuff like that, but I did a fair amount of sub-stories in each of these as well, to varying degrees. 3 I only spent about 13 hours with, but didn't do very much side stuff at all. 4 I spent about 19 hours with, and did less side stuff than I had remembered, as far as like sub-stories and stuff like that, but there's more stuff there, and I think the achievement list in 4 doesn't do the greatest job of tracking what exactly I did. Yakuza 5 I spent about 55 hours with, but I did damn near everything, as far as sub-stories and side stories and stuff like that. Not so much the mini games, but that just kind of goes to show how meaty these games can be. And then Yakuza 6 I spent about 23 hours with, and did a decent amount of the side stuff, mostly stat grinding, but also a fair amount of sub-stories. and whatnot. If you just mainline the stories in these games, most of them are gonna take you definitely less than 20 hours, considering the fact that I spent just over 20 in most of them and did a fair amount of side stuff. I know it can be overbearing getting into a long-running series that is very demanding of your time. If you're enjoying it in the moment, then it shouldn't be a concern as far as wanting to catch up. If you're not, then you could just simply mainline the stories and be kind of in and out in like 15, 20 hours, probably max for most of them. Especially if you want to play on like an easier difficulty or something. I played all of them on normal. But yeah, Space Cowboy, I know you've played these games on harder difficulties and you've even done some legend runs, I want to say. Talk to me a little bit about your experience with that.
First of all the points that Cobra made are absolutely true, especially coming from somebody who is more familiar with the series. And not just with this, that's with any game you play. Don't feel like you have to kill yourself to like complete everything in one go, that you have to be a completionist, especially for something like Yakuza, where sometimes it gets to the mundane. Oh, you have to dine at every single eatery and clear out the menus. You have to run for a total of 1,000 kilometers. You have to play every single mini game, and each of those mini games in of themselves have achievements. Still, these games, regardless of all of the crazy amounts of stuff on them, are still really, really fun to play. Mini games can vary. You know, not everything's going to be a hit. Even with me, to this day, there are still some things that I really don't care about as far as like some of the side activities go. And yes, I usually do play these games on hard difficulty at first just because I'm more familiar with like action games and all that stuff. I think I played Zero on normal just to go through it, but K1, the first playthrough when I played on hard, I really wasn't having too many issues. K2, same thing. When I did play Legend on Kiwami 1, there were a couple spots where I found some challenge, and that was really only because those were like the annoying bosses. Also, the rail shooter sections suck in both games, Zero and K1. But again, Yakuza is still some of the best action games have to offer. You should play these games, even though if you're not a person who's jumped into the series, because there are still a lot of you out there who have not, because again, there is a lot, especially with the new games, or at least the RPG era that we are now in, which we're not going to get into in this, but I will say if you also feel like you want to start off with 7, because it is mostly cut off, even though you really shouldn't, but if you want to start with 7 and then play 8, which that's even more not recommended, you probably want to play the other games before you jump into 8.
I think that's a good point, stating that Yakuza Like a Dragon or Yakuza 7 is like a good starting point because it is the softest of soft reboots. It's not really a reboot, but just kind of like new protagonist. I haven't played it at all, but I know that that is one of the recommended entry points for some people, but I would probably put that below Zero and Kiwami. If you have access to the first game on PS2, that's probably a fine place to start too, because you can kind of see the progression of things a little bit more linearly. So, Yakuza 0, God, it's going to be tough pacing the spoilers and non-spoilers. I would just say, play these games if you haven't. We're not going to come out swinging with heavy spoilers, but just be warned, some things might slip in here and there as far as spoilers are concerned. But spoiler-free wise, the best way I can encapsulate 0 is that it is a game of moments. There are a lot of individual moments throughout the game that are very memorable. And each of the games does have that to a degree, but I feel like 0 especially really comes out swinging with the memorable moments between both Kazuma Kiryu and Goro Majima. And you kind of alternate between them every few chapters.
I'll jump in real quick and just say this is really more of like a Majima prequel story, but also of course still giving you a little bit more Kiryu and just kind of showing you like what he would become as far as him becoming the Dragon of Dojima and this legendary figure that he will be within the Yakuza, and a bunch of characters that you are never going to see again because of course this is a prequel that came out many games after the fact. Granted, that's kind of a thing with the Yakuza series as a whole in terms of like, oh, characters getting introduced only to kind of die right after. Not many characters stick around, where you are essentially playing a soap opera in all of these games. So if things do seem pretty unrealistic, I mean, granted, it's a video game, it's going to seem a little bit unrealistic for the most part, but especially in this case because you're playing character-driven stories with a bunch of crazy, wacky events.
The series is, in its main stories, very over the top, but not necessarily in the same way that you might see in memes or in the side stories or sub-stories or whatever they're called.
It's not DMC levels of jank and like wackiness.
And there's something lovable about when games do go that direction, and we'll get into it. There's moments in each of these games that are kind of ridiculous and maybe a little eye-roll inducing, but knowing that it is basically like a Japanese soap opera and that it is just very overly dramatic in that way. To dig in a little more deeply into the narrative of Zero, we got Kiryu's side with, of course, the Dojima lieutenants are extremely memorable. Kuze especially, of course, is heavily memed on and all of that, and this will be kind of a through line, but I don't mean to be a party pooper when it comes to it, but like I just find sometimes the conversation surrounding certain game series becomes meme reference, and it just doesn't really do it for me after a certain point. The memes can be an in for you, right, with Kuze and stuff like that, but it's really more so that Kuze is just a compelling presence on screen, and that's why he gets memed on, etc. and so on. So a little cause and effect there, I guess. And then I think like the main other thing to point out with Kiryu's story, aside from how it ties in with Majima's, is that he becomes a real estate agent, which is like pretty goofy. Be even goofier if I had played this with context of the other games. That's like a big part of Kiryu's side, and honestly, the real estate stuff when it comes to the mini games and the real estate royale and all that, like I could give a fuck. I've messed around with the cabaret club stuff with Majima, sure, to an extent, but like ultimately that's not really why I'm here. What do you have to say about Kiryu's role in Yakuza 0's story?
I mean, yeah, it's pretty much like the thing I kind of stated before in terms of this game mostly being more of a Majima prequel than anything else. Can't really complain too much because there's still some good to be had with Kiryu's story and some of the characters that he interacts with, and also seeing a little bit more of characters that we are going to see in the actual first game itself.
I don't really feel like I got a whole lot out of Kiryu as a character in this game besides just like proving himself, but literally the games we're talking about here all have Kiryu as a protagonist, so it's not like he's left wanting as far as development, and at the time of Zero's release he had that development already, just in the future, chronologically speaking, in the universe. I guess the only other thing to mention is Nishiki's involvement in Zero, like the fact that he is buddy-buddy with Kiryu and kind of just showing us that bromance on screen, among other things for setting up specifically Kiwami / the first game. But like you were saying, it is more of a Majima story, and I think that Majima's side is much more compelling. Zero is one of those games I should probably replay at some point, and because it can kind of be played as a standalone, I can probably just do that without having to worry about, oh, let's do a full series replay or whatever. But yeah, this game really does flesh out Majima's character a lot more than what you would have seen in the previous 5 games. As far as the assassination kinds of things, it does bother me a little bit that this game does, as Space Cowboy mentioned, introduce a lot of characters that, because it's a prequel, they can't stick around, otherwise it's like, well, where is this guy in Yakuza 3, 4, 2, whatever. It's weird because there's like so many character deaths in that way, to the point where I think that it undermines that plot device. For the first few times it's shocking. It's like, oh shit, this character dies, and you wouldn't know if you start with this game who's going to stick around and who's not. After a certain point, it's like a new character gets introduced. I started assuming they would get killed off, and then, 9 times out of 10 they did, which doubled the impact to me. And then also the fact that for some reason, I understand Kiryu not killing anybody, but Majima not killing anybody is like weird to me. Do you have anything more to add as far as the story, or are you good to move on to the gameplay?
There are some things in K1 and K2 that you'll see reference from Zero, but that's because they wanted to try to keep some of the things from Zero that new fans might have recognized, because Zero is arguably the most popular game in the entire franchise. This is the game that essentially got new Yakuza fans interested in the series and would pretty much put the series on the map for the West as a whole. You're going to see a lot of Yakuza 0-isms in future games, to the point where, at least in my opinion, it gets annoying.
Yeah, for sure. Especially, I think, in the Kiwamis. It's particularly notable. But before we get into Kiwami, the gameplay of Yakuza 0, combat's quite fun. And I mean, that can be said for pretty much all the games we'll be talking about. I've got my gripes with certain entries for sure. I thought the style switching was cool. I feel like the random mooks that they put you up against are so frail to where any crowd control style, like breaker style on Majima's part, you can just kind of spam the same combo over and over again and do fine, at least on normal. Most mobs and even a lot of boss fights, you can just do like the top spin combo with Majima and just like stun lock pretty much everybody, which is kind of a bummer. And I noticed that when coming back to this game after having played some of the others and like messing around with side stuff in combat, and the combat feels good. I don't think this is necessarily the best combat in this series, which might be a controversial take. It's a tricky thing for me because I'm not like super experienced with action games in this vein, aside from this series now. I feel like there are other games in this series that do a better job of incentivizing you to differentiate your attacks and your combos, even though I guess technically the same thing could maybe be said for most of them, because they're action games, but I honestly kind of equate these games to being like modern beat-em-ups in a sense, as opposed to something closer to like a Devil May Cry, which my experience with that series is kind of limited to 5. I thought the style switching was cool. It's just, it was very easy in this game to just kind of stick to one that worked for certain types of enemies, and then maybe you switch, but I wasn't really like, switching on the fly. And there's a skill ceiling component to it for sure, where it's like, oh, well, you can do all this crazy stuff, but to me, the most important thing is like, what does the game demand of you throughout the duration of it, as opposed to just messing around and trying to break that skill ceiling. And sure, there's like post-game boss fights when you like complete everything and stuff like that. I'm sure those specifically will require you to have mastered certain aspects of the combat, but in my experience, just on normal difficulty, kind of spammy, and also some frustrating frustrating moments like the car chases were already mentioned. Those kind of suck ass. The escort missions when you're escorting Makoto with, I think it's just Majima. I don't think Kiryu has any. No, Kiryu does have. Never mind.
I think he just has one.
Yeah, he has the one in the late game with the guys with like the chainsaws or whatever, or like the drills or whatever it was. Those are just annoying. Yeah, get good, I guess. Fine, whatever. It's just annoying. And this escort mission, defend this person kind of stuff, I don't think is present in literally any of the other games. Before we get into, I guess, side content, anything else to add as far as combat in Zero?
Every single one of these games, even the ones we're not talking about, are still like really great games to play. And then with Zero, the style switching again, it's really fun. In terms of Kiryu, everything does seem a bit balanced. Nothing really seems like too much stronger than the other. But with Majima, Breaker will play the game for you.
I guess if you don't want like an autopilot style, you can mess around. Some people really love Slugger. I know that's another one people consider broken.
Slugger is really dope because it's the weapon style. Like you can pretty much mess with all of the weapons with that style. I think you actually get bonus damage with using weapons if you're using the Slugger style.
Probably. The thing with the weapon thing is like they kind of just dump on you the weapon system and crafting, and I was just like, I've been doing fine. I don't need to mess with this.
I mean, honestly, you don't really need to worry about crafting too much. I just use the weapons as extenders for heat moves. So like any weapons I have, I'll just go ahead and if I use them, I'll go ahead and replenish them, and that's pretty much it. I didn't worry about the weapon crafting too much.
Honestly, in most of these games, I didn't really mess with the weapon stuff too much because it's kind of tedious and unnecessary by and large. There's one particular title people suggest messing with the weapons a little bit more just because it's kind of designed with it in mind, but we'll get there when we get there.
One more thing I did want to mention, because we did mention the side contents for the cabaret and the insurance stuff, which is essentially your main way of making money. And also, completing these are the only way for you to access the legendary styles for these characters. So the Mad Dog style for Majima and Kiryu's standard legendary dragon style.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I missed out on, considering I was not super interested in doing these. Like, okay, these are fun little time wasters, but like, let me get back to the main story. Let me get back to beating dudes up.
I at least completed Kiryu's because that one's really just going there and collecting your money, just waiting for that. I'm not a fan of the Cabaret Club mini games as a whole. It's not one of my favorite parts of the games, but I still do play them. It's basically your best way to earn the income because that's how you're upgrading yourself by making money. That is kind of cool that they centered it around the economic boom because it's what, the 80s in Japan?
Yeah, it's like the late 80s, I think. That's good narrative gameplay synergy, which is something that comes up time to time in my videos. I think it's cool that it's based on money because of that narrative tie-in, or I guess, you know, that real world tie-in with the economic boom, as you were saying. But at the same time, it's just a lot. Get millions and millions and millions of yen. They kind of shower you with it, but I just found it to be kind of not my favorite progression system, even though some of the other progression systems in the following games are a little simpler, but sometimes less is more. Kind of a small gripe, but a gripe nonetheless, is the fetch quests in the main missions. I forget if this is Zero or Kiwami, they both do this, but it's like, oh, get a specific kind of liquor for the homeless guys.
Yeah, that stuff, that also gets a little annoying too.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know where anything is, and maybe if you've played the other games, sure, yeah, eventually you come to know Kamurocho to that extent. I just was Googling this shit. It's not fun. Really, really small thing, obviously. Sub-stories, just kind of a blanket statement. They're fun little distractions. They're nice ways to get additional experience or money or whatever the progression system might be for any given game. I try to do at least some sub-stories in each of the games, but I also just kind of did it to the extent to where it didn't stop being fun. Like if it ever hit the point where I was like, all right, I just want to do the main story, I would just do that. I already talked about how I think this game would be more enjoyable playing it again or playing it now with the context of the other games. You can very much enjoy Zero on its own. Plenty of Yakuza fans have done that, and I mean that as kind of a little bit of a jab at some people. Just the tiniest bit. Playing the other games, I think, gives a greater appreciation for this title because it was designed with little references and stuff like that in mind without having too grand of a tie into the rest of the games. The other thing to kind of add on to that point is the sentiment that, oh, it's all downhill from here, which is, I think, totally heinously disingenuous. I mean, you could maybe feel that way, that Zero is far and away better than the rest of them. It's fine if you feel that way. It's y'all's opinion ultimately, but it's not my number one. Like, I don't think that it's all downhill from here, especially like I was saying with adding context and like showing how things build narratively, but even gameplay wise, at least once you go back to 3 and things are actually progressing gameplay wise. I think it's fascinating to see, okay, this is sort of the starting point for the PS3, and then Zero and Kiwami are kind of that end point of like, this is, in my opinion, not quite the peak necessarily of combat, but at least like close to it. It's not too far off.
We'll talk about peak soon enough.
Before we talk about peak, we have to talk about Kiwami. When I started Kiwami, I was enjoying it more because for whatever reason, the combat felt tighter to me, and I can't really explain why. There's some issues I have with it. Enemies feel a lot more spongy here, which is a negative, although I did complain about them being too frail in Zero. And then the bosses have this weird health regen thing where you have to do a heat move in a specific style to break it, and then those do like less and less damage the more that comes up. The combat, I think, does drag because of that, but the moment-to-moment feel of how Kiryu feels to play, I thought felt better and more dialed in. I don't know if you have anything to say on that, if you feel the same way.
There's a lot of different things in terms of like being able to switch in between styles, maybe doing one move in one style and then quickly doing a style change and then doing like a couple of other moves. It speaks to the fluidity in the combat of these games, being able to like seamlessly switch through these different styles and chaining together different moves, at least in terms of Zero and K1, just being able to like combine all of these different things to really flesh out the combat and do a lot of really cool stuff, just a lot of really great stuff. Leveling up in this game isn't really too bad because it's really just straight up experience points rather than the actual money stuff, so it's a lot more streamlined, a lot more straightforward outside of the Majima Everywhere system, which it's funny, it is cool. Does it get a lot more annoying and redundant as time goes on? Yes, especially because if you're doing a second playthrough, the Majima system will follow you even after you've completed it the first time around, completely maxed out. So you're going to be fighting high level, big ass health Majima at times where it really is just inconvenient and pretty damn annoying.
I 100% agree. I thought the Majima stuff was fun at first. It was, especially coming off of Zero, it's like, oh, Kiryu-chan and all that. It's cool and the unique encounters are funny. It just feels really grindy and tedious. And it also contributes to the characterization dissonance. It's kind of like the meme poisoning of like, oh, Majima's funny meme guy. Meanwhile, because Kiwami, the main story is based almost entirely on the first game. Like, there's not really many changes there.
For the most part, this is still Yakuza 1.
Right, for all intents and purposes. So like Majima wasn't really characterized that thoroughly, and he's like very much an antagonist in a way that the Majima Everywhere stuff is incongruent with his representation in the story. I maxed out all the other skill trees, but the Majima stuff, I don't know how many times I fought him.
I did max out the Majima shit. Like I said, I maxed out everything on my first playthrough. I didn't mind it too much, especially because I found ways to avoid Majima. There's an accessory where you can actually tell where Majima is on the map if he's anywhere near, so you can avoid him a lot better. It doesn't make the fact that it's any more annoying or any more like tedious.
Well, especially coming off of the fervor for Yakuza 0, I think it only made sense in their eyes to really lean into it. And I guess this is compounded with the fact that you can't run from encounters at all in any of these pre-Dragon Engine games, as far as I know, at least. So you get in these encounters with spongy Majima and just the spongy enemies in general. It just gets kind of tedious. And like you said, there are ways to avoid encounters, and especially with Majima, but I don't think that's necessarily a good excuse. It's like, oh, you can ignore this system of the game and it's better. Isn't that then a negative because you're trying to go out of your way to avoid it? It's still part of the game, so you gotta judge it as it is. But anyway, as far as the narrative, I don't know if it's because the future games, timeline-wise, typically reference just a few points, but for whatever reason, this game's story is just not the most memorable to me, aside from those moments that do get brought up time and time and time again. What surprised me the most, and this is big spoiler warning for Kiwami, and I guess Zero in a sense, the fact that the big players in Zero that did stick around, like Dojima, Sarah, Kazuma, and maybe some others, the fact that they were killed off was very surprising to me, and also the fact that Nishikiyama was the big bad of the first game / Kiwami, and I guess I'm kind of fortunate that that wasn't spoiled for me, but Kiwami does famously add in additional scenes for Nishiki as far as like developing his path towards the dark side, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yes, big plus. Characters like Sarah and Dojima and Kazuma are important, but only in the sense of what they serve in the story. You kind of have to put Zero in a different context. At least with a couple of those characters, they're really only there to just show you, hey, these are the characters that you see in the first game.
That's kind of the through line, the connecting tissue between Zero and the first game's story, or I guess vice versa, however you want to put it. I thought Nishikiyama, definitely having played Zero and playing Kiwami specifically with those additional scenes, fleshes him out way more as a character. I still am not like the biggest fan of him necessarily, but antagonists and main villains are kind of weirdly a weak point in a lot of these games. But I think Nishikiyama, in Kiwami specifically, with the context of Zero and those scenes, does kind of put him in more of the memorable category for sure. I feel like if you started with Kiwami or the first game, especially the first game, I feel like it would be kind of like, why should I give a shit? Because you don't see Kiryu and him interact without the Kiwami scenes in Zero and whatever. But some other characters, I think the most noteworthy are Detective Date and Haruka, of course. Yumi, I guess, is important for plot and all of that, but she doesn't really have a whole lot of screen time. It's more so what she means to Kiryu that's important. Date is dope. I think he's a really cool character, and he shows up time and again in the future games. And then Haruka, of course, is
a treasure that needs to be protected at all costs.
Absolutely. absolutely, and is also like kind of the light of Kiryu's life following this game, where he loses his two best friends from childhood. That ending scene, obviously, when Nishiki shoots the bomb and like the cash goes flying everywhere and all of that, very memorable and impactful. But like beyond that, it's not my favorite story in these games, but it's not bad. It's just there's not really a whole lot to talk about, I feel like, unless we're really gonna get in the nitty-gritty, which I don't want to do.
There are some moments that are still pretty powerful, like when Shinji and Reina do die after you find out that Reina is the one that's been helping Nishiki all along, because of course she loves him and she wants to support him despite knowing the kind of stuff he is doing. That's the lengths that she wants to go, and she still kind of gets wasted after all that, and Kiryu sees that and it's like, oh, that's really fucked up. You know, he's friends with Reina, and you know, he was also very close with Shinji. It's more of those things that show you why Kiryu is Kiryu and why we love him, and also Haruka being, you know, a badass in her own little right despite being a little girl.
Yeah, Kiryu is really like a great protagonist, and I think that's the most important thing, as opposed to there being a lot of memorable and important side characters, at least just yet. Reina and Shinji and like these important characters for moving the plot forward and kind of instilling these different virtues into Kiryu are important, but like just grand scheme, I think Kiwami feels very self-contained, which makes sense because there was never an expectation that a second game would get made. Although, because this was a remake, there's probably more hints towards potentially some things in the second game / Kiwami 2, because they could actually do that in this remake, but it's pretty subtle from what I'm remembering. It still felt very self-contained and kind of like the second game could literally go any which direction and I would be none the wiser, having only played Zero and Kiwami at that point, since Zero largely is setting up Kiwami specifically, and then Kiwami just being that self-contained original story.
I mean, I'll just say, with all the new extra additions for Nishiki, he's definitely one of the series' like strongest antagonists, at least to me. You could still say it's kind of dumb why he's doing this stuff, but again, we're playing a soap opera. It's not really supposed to make all the sense in the world. It's all drama and entertainment for entertainment's sake. But yes, Nishiki is definitely elevated because of all the new stuff.
I think they do a good job with it. I don't mean to undermine or brush past it. It's just the fact that Nishiki wasn't like a mainstay was kind of shocking to me. And I think they do a good job of like showing why. It's better than having literally nothing, which as far as I understand, that's how the first game was. He feels like he's lesser to Kiryu, even though Kiryu's locked up. Kiryu's still the favorite child and Nishiki comes to resent him. And I think that's also easy for him to do with Kiryu not being there. And also, you know, his sister's disease and like all of that kind of stuff, and her dying tragically in the hospital and stuff like that. It is really heartbreaking, and I feel for Nishiki. I'm trying to have to remember back to like 6 games ago or whatever it was.
One more thing. Don't necessarily also just look at this as, this is how Nishiki goes evil. I mean, it is, but it's also more on the theme that you will start to see throughout the series. Despite how much good Kiryu will do, or at least tries to do, he will retroactively screw over the lives of the people around him, whether he realizes it or not, and just also introducing the themes of Kiryu essentially running away and Kiryu kind of having to come up to clean up his own mess. This all kind of retroactively happens because of what Kiryu decided, what he thought was the right thing to do. This is a very central theme that you're going to see constantly throughout the series.
Very, very good point to mention while we're still kind of early on. So, Kiwami 2. It's kind of a weird game, honestly. For one, it's in the Dragon Engine. Between Kiwami and Kiwami 2, Yakuza 6 came out, which was the first Dragon Engine title. The Dragon Engine is fucking gorgeous. The lighting, the size and scale and scope of Kamurocho, the streets are wider. It feels a lot more real, I guess. Maybe a little less claustrophobic, which might be a preference for some people, but I was just blown away by the Dragon Engine originally, at least from like a presentational standpoint. Kiwami 2 is weird though if you're playing it in this order, because the next game, Yakuza 3, was the very first PS3 title, so this is kind of like the furthest ahead release-wise you would end up being for, well actually, as far as all these games, this would be the furthest ahead release-wise, funny enough. So it's a little bit of an awkward transition coming out of K2. Like with Kiwami 1, the story is pretty much intact here, like same characters, same plot points. First and foremost, we mentioned Nishiki being a strong antagonist in Kiwami 1. Kiwami 2's antagonist, Ryuji Goda, is typically referred to as the best Yakuza antagonist. I would probably agree. Like, I think that he could have used even more screen time personally, but the screen time that he gets, like, I think that scene in the Grand when Kiryu and Goda initially meet each other, I just remember having the stupidest smile on my face for both characters, how badass they were, how much the tension was building, as far as like, is it gonna break out into a fight, is it not? Goda really is Kiryu's equal at this point. What do you have to say about Ryuji Goda?
Ryuji to this day is still my favorite antagonist out of all the antagonists in the series. He's very similar to Kiryu Kiryu in terms of their morals and the way they kind of handle themselves, their honor. But at the same time, he's also still his own character. These are still organized crime gangs we're talking about here. But within the context of Yakuza, the things that he wants to do are not good. It's one of those situations where you're rooting for an antagonist when you know you're not supposed to be rooting for an antagonist, or at least in the sense that you really like this character and you wish they could stick around. And if they were someone else or if they were in different circumstances, things would have turned out different, which funnily enough, that sentiment does come up within this story a couple of times.
It's kind of that epitome of leave them wanting more. Like, I kind of wanted even more out of him, even though his scenes were always very impactful. The thing that confuses me, though, is like his fate by the end of the game.
He did die. Before their fight, the one guy gets up and then Ryuji gets shot like 4 or 5 times or something like that.
Yeah, it was like, what is he doing when Kiryu and Kaoru are like making out?
He's just dead.
He's just laying there dead. God damn it. Yeah. That's so fucked up. That's actually really fucked up. I guess that brings us to Kaoru. I really enjoyed her differing perspectives to Kiryu, being on the police force, but them kind of pairing up and being like a reluctant tag team in a sense. Throughout the game's story, I really enjoyed not only her pushback on Kiryu, but also her being able to goad out some of Kiryu's past trauma and kind of exploring that a bit more. The first game, a lot of traumatic stuff happens, and even in Zero, retroactively, right? And the fact that it doesn't get brought up much in those games of like, hey, your friends just died in front of you and shit. Like, are you okay? And so like, that's something that is kind of a prevalent theme that does continue to be present, but I think especially so in this second game story, with Kaoru also having her own tragic past. I think she's a cool character, man. It's kind of a shame that she, at least as far as I know, doesn't come back.
You know, Kaoru's cool. Kaoru's one of the better female characters. I mean, obviously outside of Haruka. Like you said, Kaoru was able to bring out certain things in Kiryu, but he's also still trying to help out Kaoru with her stuff because he does have the experience with trauma.
Totally, yeah, that's a good point, that Kiryu does the same thing for Kaoru in drawing out, why do you feel this way? Why do you feel the need to like uncover the past? It's best left behind. All those kinds of themes about embracing and overcoming your past traumas. Kiwami 2, and just the second game story in general, it's definitely one that stands out to me as being particularly strong. Although there are some stupid things, like there's the whole Kazuki facial reconstructive twin thing that happens, and then I feel like they kind of just brush over that, where it's like, well, where the fuck did this guy come from with his same face and all that shit? The fact that Kiryu was there and like caused the Jingwan to be eradicated and like caused Kaoru and Ryuji to get split up and shit, stupid.
That's not even like because he actually did something, it's because he was just there.
It's convenient plot wise so that when they're talking to like this former Jingwan guy, Kiryu just randomly is like, I was also there, so I can also recount this from my perspective, and it's like, shut the fuck up. This is so stupid.
Even though you really only showed up when things were kind of starting to simmer down.
That's one of those things where I'm just like, this is stupid. And I know I just said this is one of the better stories, but there's dumb shit in all these games, trust. And then of course the finale where it's like, no, I'm secretly the Korean guy who's behind this. No, I'm the Korean guy who's behind this. No, actually, I'm not dead. What's his name? Terada?
Yes, the 5th chairman.
Yeah, like, I'm not dead, and I'm actually the Korean guy behind all this. And it's like, okay.
I was also working with the Omi.
Yeah, also working with the Omi and all that. It's stupid and kind of hammy, but in a way that is still enjoyable. Japanese games have a lot of this kind of stuff where like there's usually something that if you really look at it and break it down, it could be seen as stupid or like kind of contrived, but it's that kind of soap opera-y kind of anime sort of bullshit that I like and kind of appreciate. You know, if there wasn't these like stupid twists, maybe some of them could have been left out, like the face replication thing or whatever, but if all these twists were gone, then it would just be kind of generic and not as interesting to talk about either. We didn't even talk about Daigo. He's introduced here. He develops into more of a leadership role by the end, but he's really more important, I think, in some of the future games.
Daigo's still cool though, just getting introduced to him and kind of seeing how much of a shitbag he is, at least at first, but then you kind of see he's not like this by accident. Again, this is one of those things where it's like, oh, Kiryu retroactively screwing over someone else's life because of something else that he did.
Yayoi is also another character to mention, Daigo's mom, who is the chairman of the Tojo. There's that sub-story in Kiwami. The sub-stories are easy to miss in Kiwami because you have to like wear an accessory for them to show up on the map. In a remake, I get that the first 2 games you could actually literally miss stuff and there weren't markers, but just show me where the fucking side content is, especially with important story stuff like that, with Kiryu talking to Yayoi about Dojima.
Yeah, that really should have been like a standard story thing.
They should have taken advantage of the fact that it was a remake and put that into the main story. We have to talk about gameplay in Kiwami 2. The Dragon Engine combat is not the greatest in my opinion. Even just having played Zero and Kiwami at the time, it felt really shallow coming off of those games, not just because the lack of style changes. The ragdolls are stupid. You're kicking these guys and they're flying across the goddamn street. This being the second Dragon Engine game, it still like just doesn't feel all that fun to play, but also at the same time the mobs are like really easy to just grab a bike and just like one-shot them basically.
Well, lucky for you, my friend. You are talking to a Dragon Engine hater. Judgment, it's better, obviously. With this game in Yakuza 6, I don't like the Dragon Engine combat. Outside of a couple boss fights, the Shindo boss fight is fine, and of course, the final boss fight with Ryuji. Other than that, though, the extreme heat mode is cool, but trying to force the extreme heat thing to be the big thing other than heat moves, I don't really care for all that much. Also, Kiwami 2 has the worst leveling system of all the games.
That's fair. I'll just give my 2 cents on it. In certain cases, it's cool to have progression for combat's sake within other means, right? You think about like Persona games or something where you're doing the social links or confidants or whatever, and you're gaining more of an upper hand in combat by doing the socializing kinds of stuff. Here, though, you're not getting like character development or anything. You're literally just eating at a restaurant, filling yourself up, taking laxatives, doing it again and again and again until you're out of money. To try to max these things out, it's so grindy. When you do this, it's like hard to gauge how much of this should I do to be okay to get through. And like honestly, given the difficulty of the previous 2 games, which is not like super noteworthy on normal, I shouldn't have expected to struggle at all. At the same time, it's like, well, the main story doesn't, in retrospect, give you nearly enough orbs to like really level yourself up that significantly, at least in comparison to some of the meal combos and shit. But yeah, it's really tedious, really grindy, really boring, has no place in an action game, in my opinion. It just really drags the experience if that's something that you end up feeling compelled to participate in, because, you know, it's a core gameplay system, so of course you're going to want to participate in it because that's how you level up. But when the sheer act of leveling up is as tedious as K2 and 6, it's such an easy thing to like turn off players, I think. At least on New Game Plus, like you would carry over anything you've progressed. At the same time, yeah, the combat is just not really my favorite thing ever either. Heat moves do feel kind of neutered, for lack of a better term. They really don't have as much impact. It's kind of a design philosophy shift that you could maybe credit to Kiwami or 6 if you really want to pin it on Dragon Engine specifically. Although I will say some other perks of the Dragon Engine, besides like the graphical update and all that, there's no loading into interiors, so you can literally just walk into a restaurant or walk into a convenience store and it's seamless. And then also being able to run from battles, it does undermine the mob encounters to an extent, but at the same time, there are plenty of times in the PS3 era titles where I'm like not wanting to do combat and then get into a combat encounter. It's like, well, I have no choice but to just play this out. Anything else to say on K2?
Yakuza 2 has one of the best segments in any Yakuza game. The castle segment is one of the most badass fucking segments. The absolute gauntlet of going up that tower and everything is fucking great.
It is kind of the question of like, where did this come from? But it's so cool that it's like, who cares? Guess I should say moving back to Yakuza 3, since this is, as far as the games we're talking about, the specific versions and remakes, this is the earliest title release-wise. Not counting the remaster, but it is a remaster, not a remake, so it is very much just the PS3 game, accessible on modern platforms.
Yakuza 3 incoming, here we go.
Yeah, Yakuza 3, which honestly, it's something that is kind of true, but at the same time, the fact that there's seemingly a large section of the fan base that is content to just skip over these games is wild to me. Just play them on easy or something. Just mainline the main story. Like, is it really that intolerable to do this for the sake of experiencing these games that people claim to love so much and then they just skip over like half the series? It's your prerogative if you wanted to do that or whatever, but like I mentioned with my playtime, Yakuza 3 took me 13 hours. That wasn't completely mainlining, but that was like not doing very much side stuff at all because I had a lot of problems with the gameplay, but I'm used to playing older titles than this. It is very much back to basics, coming from especially 0 and Kiwami 1, since those are kind of the evolution of where the combat eventually goes from Yakuza 3 and on. And so there's no style changing. There is like the whole Blockuza meme of the enemies blocking constantly, and there are ways to get around that, dashing behind their back, grabbing them, using weapons that stun. At best, I could say it's a bit of a learning curve. At worst, I can say that it's pretty frustrating. Honestly, to the point where the Lao Kalong fight, I considered dropping it down to easy because I was just getting annoyed. I did push through and just finish the game on normal anyway. As far as I've heard, the remaster being at a higher frame rate, at least on PC, I don't know how it is on console or if you can even change that, but the frame rate causes issues with the timings of blocks and the quick step spacing and stuff like that as well. It's at least partially the remaster's fault. I can't say how much of it is the original game and how much of it is the remaster, but the remaster definitely doesn't help when it comes to the lack of refinement, I would say.
Yeah, that is the whiplash. If you do play the remakes and then you go to the remasters where it's like, oh, why does the combat seem so much more dumbed down or less than the others? Because this is the original gameplay evolved over time between the first 5 games.
It's one of those things, like, I had my issues with it, but it wasn't intolerable. I can tolerate this for like, 12 hours or whatever it was, right? I'm sure you could probably do it in like 10 if you played it on easy and just did the story. There are a couple of gameplay things to note just briefly. There's the chase segments that are added here. Also feel pretty unrefined compared to in 4 and 5, but it's cool. I actually kind of do like those segments. The revelations are also hilarious. The first one, which I think is mandatory, where the lady like flips over on the moped and like lands gets wheels down somehow. Those are fun. I didn't do very many of them in 3 in particular, but it's like, I think, tasteful integration of the zanier elements into stuff that you probably want to do side content wise, because it does evolve the combat and give you access to some things that may or may not have been mainstays in later titles also. Anything else to say on the gameplay side of Yakuza 3? I don't think there's a whole lot more to discuss.
I still enjoy the combat, even though it still has its problems. But I still think, again, like I enjoy the original 3 to 5 as like my favorite stretch of the series, because I really do enjoy just what the original style of the games were, especially from an aesthetic standpoint. It usually does go 2, 3, 4, and 5 when I think about what the series is supposed to look like and what it plays like. And the first thing that comes to mind when I think about like, what is Yakuza?
Yakuza 3, I think, is worth playing because the narrative, while I do have some issues with it, which we'll get into later, it's got like such a distinct vibe and is very refreshing in some sense coming off of the previous titles, given that you start in Ryukyu, which is basically a tropical setting. You're on a beachfront at an orphanage that Kiryu is now running since he's stepped away from the Yakuza, as it were. It's a very slow start because of that, but it is very heartfelt. I actually caught myself getting choked up a number of times with Kiryu dealing with these kids' problems and dealing with conflict for the first time and stuff like that. This is Kiryu at his happiest. This is kind of like him doing what he wants to be doing, but then ends up getting dragged into affairs that he otherwise wouldn't ultimately want to get involved in. I really did enjoy the slice of life, tropical kinds of things as sort of a pace breaker early on. Do you have anything to say about Ryukyu or kind of the early goings of Yakuza 3's story?
God damn those orphanage kids, man. I love the family. It's so wholesome, considering his position in his life and growing up in an orphanage, and now him essentially having his own orphanage along with Haruka, and them having their own family with these kids. And they all feel like their own characters, even though they don't show up all that much.
They really do. I could understand someone maybe not being as into it because it is slower, but you're coming fresh off of what was going to be Kiryu and Kaoru's last moments at the top of a tower that was going to blow up and shit. It's like, okay, maybe we could use a little reprieve here. Of course, Rikia being introduced, one of my favorite one-off side characters in any of these games. I love the way that he is able to break Kiryu out of his shell or get Kiryu to play along with things. Like when they're going to the hotel and whatever, and he like pretends that they're a couple and shit. The fact that he's able to think on the fly like that, he kind of has this more passionate, I guess, personality. Kiryu's passionate, but like in a stoic sort of way. Spoiler alert. It's so fucking sad when he does get killed, especially because it's from the stupid, let's leave the bad guy with the gun kind of thing. It's for the sake of the drama, I guess.
Kiryu really does grow to love Rikia. It's really hard with a guy like Kiryu where he doesn't really have a lot of people like that in his life. And of course, considering everything that the character has gone through, it makes it all the more harder when he does die, because then it's like Kiryu just got this friendship with a character like this again, only for something like this to happen.
Kiryu's past trauma does lead to him being more guarded. He doesn't even want Rikia to come with him to Kamurocho at first. He begs Kiryu to let him go, and he's like, all right, fine. Just a great character all around. One of the few things I think in Yakuza 3's story that gets that full arc. It doesn't feel like it's missing anything. That's kind of my big gripe when it comes to Yakuza 3. I know the development cycle was short, so this is why it feels this way. So I think it's kind of says something about my intuition as far as not knowing that it was a short dev cycle, but feeling like some things were half-baked. The antagonists are fun. Kanda is a meme where you're chasing him around in his underwear and shit. Hamazaki is important to a degree in 4, but this is one of those things that screams of cut content or like short dev cycle that he's just dealt with off screen. He seemed pretty badass when he was first introduced. It's a shame you don't really actually get to go up against him here. I guess like Majima was also a suspect. Something I failed to mention is that the Yakuza 3 story has kind of a James Bond vibe to it, which is something that I appreciate a little bit more in retrospect. With the different suspects, very mysterious, and then the government gets tied in with it and all that. But Mine is cool. There's potential there. I just think that he needed more screen time and the game needed to be longer. Not for the sake of being longer, but for the sake of exploring his character and doling out these plot beats a little bit more naturally. Hence the chapter that's literally called The Plot, where they just exposit to you. I can tell, at least in retrospect, that this wasn't the way that these things were meant to be doled out to begin with, but it was more so like, we're short on dev time. Instead of fleshing out this last third of the game or whatever, let's just dump all the details so that way we can just get to the big finale. And I think that that kind of undercuts the impact of the big finale for me. And like Mine as a character, it's not the worst case of a last second sob story sympathy card being pulled in this series, trust me, but it still kind of does feel like a bit of an ass pull with the sympathy card. Like we're suddenly supposed to care that Mine is going to jump off the building.
The reasons why Mine does the things he wants to do is because he wants to save the Tojo in his own way. He kind of schemes against Daigo despite how much he does care for Daigo.
He's another side of the Kiryu's coin in a different way to Goda. The fact that he was raised an orphan but wasn't shown the same kindness that Kiryu was, and so then he doesn't show that same kindness protagonist back in turn. It would have been an interesting what if like Mine would have stuck around. I think he's an interesting character that could have stood to be explored a little bit more, but he suplexes Timu Wesker off the side of a hospital, so it just doesn't really work out in a way where we get more out of Mine. I think a Kiwami 3, while not necessary, would be interesting only if they explore these characters more and actually like realize the vision more fully than this game did. And I know it's tricky because the lead director of Yakuza did leave. I'm not really holding my breath for Kiwami 3, but I wouldn't stick my nose up at it either.
It's one of those things where it's like, if it did happen, as much as I wouldn't want it, I just have to suck it up and deal with it. I don't think 3 needs the remake. You'd think the remaster would have been able to like fix some things, and kind of does, but it also doesn't. So long as they don't cut out anything, that's also an issue that is there with the original 2 releases of 1 and 2 and Kiwami 1 and 2, is that some things might not hit as hard because of certain things being changed, whether it's aesthetics of a level or segment, or maybe like some snow or rain or music.
It really is like those kinds of things that I think cause people to be like, oh, it lost its soul or whatever because the atmosphere isn't exactly the same, the music, whatever it might be. And I get that, but I've said it a lot. If you enjoyed the original game so much, it's like nothing is stopping you if a remake happens from just continuing to play that and be totally content with that. You're currently content. What does it rob anybody of by a remake just existing that may not be as good in some individual's eyes? I want people to experience my favorite games too, of course, so that way we can talk about it and maybe you find a game that really resonates with you the way that it resonates with me. At the same time, I'm not like opposed to some of those games getting remade to certain degrees, partially out of curiosity, but also because I know there's things that could be improved. Now, whether or not that comes to fruition or not just really depends. I don't feel robbed of anything because Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl exists or something and I have nostalgia for Gen 4. That's like a whole conversation. Platinum is the way to play it, but even if they remade Platinum, it still would have been a similar case for me personally as far as preferring the original. The whole remake discourse just annoys me when people try to like shame people for preferring a remake to the original game. I think my point is a remake is never going to be exactly capturing the same literally exact essence as the original game because it's a different product. It is a pros and cons kind of scenario more often than not. I think the biggest shame, like you mentioned, is the Yakuza 3 remaster didn't really do the greatest job of actually like improving the game in the ways that would have been noteworthy. But at the same time, like it's fine. It's a PS3 game. Just know what you're getting into. Yakuza 4. When it comes to gameplay, there's not a ton to say in my opinion. It's generally refined from Yakuza 3 as far as like Kiryu's playstyle is concerned. It just feels better. But the most important thing is that you have 4 different playable characters that each have their different gameplay styles, and this is what eventually turns into individual characters having multiple styles, but here it's just split across these different playable characters. And I think that the variety that is instilled in 4 and 5 by having these different playable characters with different styles is much appreciated and very fun to mess around with. And of course, playable characters being Akiyama, Saejima, Tanimura, and Kiryu. There's a lot of nitty-gritty we could get into if we really wanted to. I don't think it's totally necessary, but do you have anything to say on Yakuza 4's gameplay or the styles or how that works with the playable characters and stuff?
4 and 5, man, some of the best combat in the entire series to this day. I don't care what anybody says. I love the multiple characters, especially because the new characters in these games are actually fun. They are great additions to the series that actually stick around, at least as far as 2 of them go. Saejima, sick as shit. Akiyama is my boy. Tanimura is underrated. The multiple styles, like being split between these characters, is great. Like Kiryu still being the legendary grizzled fighter with his legendary fighting style, being an all-rounder. We have Saejima being this big burly guy that focuses mostly on big swings and grapples. We have Akiyama, who is a very fast and agile fighter that focuses on kicks. And Tanimura, who's pretty interesting, focuses more on like counters and parries and all that kind of stuff. It's very refreshing. Heat moves felt good in the 3. It feels even better in this game, especially when you get to like the better heat moves for the 4 characters and actually feeling that effect of having like, oh no, this is my finishing move. I love Yakuza 4 and 5 so much.
Couldn't have said it better. Variety is kind of the name of the game with 4, and especially when we get to 5, breathe some new life into these games, as in release order they're very iterative and like not that different from one another, and so each little refinement is much appreciated. The way that the individual stories tie together is a little messy. I understand that, but as I mentioned with 2's story, there's always dumb shit that you could point to in any one of these games. I think the most important thing is that the characters are very fleshed out. I enjoyed each and every one of their parts individually, even if the way that it ties together is a little messy, and even if some some of the antagonists are a little half-baked. Those antagonists still serve good foils for our main four. The finale in general, at the top of the Millennium Tower, the Yakuza 4, so to speak, are dressed in black, a stack of money in the middle, they all have their individual fights and stuff like that. It's really great shit. The main contention with the Yakuza 4 story from what I've seen is rubber bullets, and like, yeah, it's kind of dumb. At first glance, it undermines Saijima's arc, but at the same time, like, he still thinks that he did that and still carries that weight.
It goes into the overall theme of Saijima following this system. He gets screwed by said system. He basically just gives up. Throughout Saijima's story, he learns to pick himself back up and, to still carve out a path for himself and not just accept what the system is setting for him. That's kind of a thing for all of the characters. You have Tanimura, who's the beat cop. He has to follow the system. It's because of that thing that screwed over people in the past. It's one of the reasons why his father got killed at the end, where he has to deal with Munakata and like, oh yeah, you are the epitome of the cog in the wheel, the system, the person in power who wants to keep his position and keep his power and gain more power and all that stuff. Same thing with Akiyama, where he's a person who is in this position to help people that are not in power with all of this money. Despite Akiyama being such a nice guy, he only really helps people he chooses to help. Even he learns, oh yeah, I could have helped people the same way some others might have helped me, the way I was before getting Sky Finance and all of these things.
Also, Akiyama being screwed by the system previously. The 10 bill from like the first game, wasn't it like Akiyama who made that transaction or something as a banker? He didn't realize what he was doing, but it was more like he processed it, or at least the blame was pinned on him or something. It's even more impressive, I think, even for as messy as it can be at times, that it is tying things back to like previous games. Yeah, there's character threads with Kiryu and stuff, but at least this is where it's like most notable because it does directly tie back to that first game.
Not to say that Kiryu obviously still isn't important. He's still a main character in this game, but he's probably like the most cut off, at least as far as like his importance to the narrative, because Kiryu at this point is still in his position of living out his life of the orphanage with Haruka, just chilling out. With the Tojo clan getting screwed over and not being in a great place, Yakuza 4 is pretty much at the climax of that. Daigo is at such a low point where he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how he's going to fix the Tojo. So at this point, he's kind of just ready to do anything he can in order to keep what little people are left, because the Tojo clan is at the weakest it's ever been. So Daigo's like, I gotta do this, otherwise we're screwed. I can't do anything else. It all goes back to the causality of Kiryu's actions and how everything has kind of been piling on and leading on to all these different outcomes throughout all of these different games. When you have Kiryu confronting Daigo, and it's like, this is the thing he has to do to try to set things right. And for Kiryu to finally feel like he's actually confronting his past, he's actually doing something about it. There's actually a line in the game that Arai makes when Kiryu first comes to Kamurocho, and he's like, oh, Kiryu, you're finally here. But you're too late, Kiryu. You're always too late.
Kiryu being very conflicted on whether or not he even wants to get involved, but then ultimately when he decides to get involved, it is too late and shit has already hit the fan. Whereas if he had gotten involved earlier, he maybe could have prevented these things from happening, but even then, there's a case to be made that maybe he shouldn't get involved, but he has too big of a heart for him to leave behind the people he cares about.
Yeah, and that's always been the duality of Kiryu. There's always that hypothetical of Kiryu would have been the one to lead the Tojo to like a great era and all this stuff, but at the same time, his mindset and the way he would have wanted to run the Yakuza probably wouldn't have worked out all that well in the end because of his like samurai-esque code of honor and how he carries himself.
Right, like he maybe wouldn't have been willing to do the same things that Daigo and some of the other previous leaders were forced to do because of his honor. And it really is kind of that sentiment of those who are best fit to lead are the ones who don't want the power. I think we're good to move on to Yakuza 5, which, if we're talking refinements from 3 to 4, I'd say the refinements from 4 to 5 might be more noteworthy to an extent. Like, 5 feels, I think at least, extremely polished. The variety is there in even more droves than in 4, with the various side stories. Like, you have Kiryu with the taxi driving, you got Saejima with the hunting, you've got Haruka with the dancing stuff, and then Akiyama kind of like joins in halfway through. And then you've got Shinado with the baseball stuff. The crazy thing is that each of these side stories, at least in my opinion, were surprisingly engrossing. In fact, the taxi driving is what I did the least of, even though I was enjoying it. But then subsequently, I ended up getting like really sucked into each of the other ones and then going back to do the taxi stuff later. Saejima's hunting thing, for instance. At first, when they force you to do it a couple times, I was like, I'm not doing this shit. And then I just randomly got really into it and then did the entire storyline there. And I think that the shooting there feeling a little clunky kind of works because it's not like Doom or something like that. It's just shoot the bear in the head a couple times and that's it. It's supposed to feel like a little bit more real realistic, quote unquote, like a little more shaky, a little unstable with your aiming and shit. The Haruka dancing stuff, like obviously some people might take it or leave it. If you do all the optional missions with her, which I did do, you do the same song like 20 times, which did get kind of old, especially because the difficulty was pretty easy. I didn't really struggle with any of like the main missions or any of like the traditional songs. Some of the dance battles caught me off guard just because having to manage it, but once I figured it out, it was fine and pretty fun. Shinada's baseball stuff, it does become a little autopilot when you level up enough because the range at which you can hit the ball becomes basically the entire box. Just really enjoyed the side stories and the sub stories, which I did most of as well. There's only a handful I think that I'm missing, some of which require me to do the eating at the restaurants thing. Like there's one that has a prereq for that, and there's a couple others as well, but I've pretty much done everything in regards to standard side content, not mini games and all that. Do you have anything to add as far as the side content in Yakuza 5?
The great thing about the side content with each of these characters is that it all ties back into the actual stories of these characters and like what's actually going on in their positions and all that stuff, because Shinada's whole thing is dealing with what happened with him in his baseball career and how he kind of got screwed over and where he is now and where he's trying to get back. Haruka having to leave. She can't be at the orphanage anymore because of her ties with Kiryu, so she goes off to have her career as an idol. But then of course we also have Akiyama, what's going on with him and how he also kind of ties in with Haruka and how he's helping her out. You have Saejima and the prison break and how he has to survive. And then you also have Suzuki-san driving the cab.
Yeah, well said. Especially to speak on the different characters. The fact that each of them have their stories take place in a different city, very cool, very refreshing. The fact that we start out as Kiryu is nice, but in a new setting. Nagasugai, really like this location. It's by the water. I kind of have a bias for whatever reason to cities and games that are by the waters. There's something like comforting about it to me. The taxi driving and him trying to be undercover and all that, getting roped back into more Yakuza nonsense. Space Cowboy already mentioned some of the others, like with the prison break with Saejima and Haruka chasing her dream of being an idol and Shinada redeeming himself. It's such like a unique perspective, I think, for a series that primarily is focused on actual Yakuza. None of these characters are even really directly involved with the Yakuza anymore.
Saejima should be a patriarch.
Oh, that's right. He's promised the patriarchy, and that's why they don't want to let him out of jail.
To make a point about Yakuza 4 real quick, because we were talking about like the different cities, even though Yakuza 4 all takes place within Kamurocho still, the great part about Yakuza 4 is that it's probably the most in-depth that you'll get with Kamurocho in terms of exploring it, because with all the different characters traveling through like rooftops, sewers, all these different intricate settings of Kamurocho that we haven't really explored before, and it makes it feel more fresh and fun to explore.
It's kind of crazy how fleshed out Kamurocho is in 4, like how many different avenues you can take and the different levels there are to it as well. I do think like 5 does a good job in its own right with all these new locations and then going back to Kamurocho for the finale. Quick shout out to some of the side characters. Watase is badass. Baba's an excellent character. And then of course Kurosawa being the puppet master, and then Aizawa being Kiryu's ultimate rival by the end. I think Aizawa gets a little bit too much shit. Like I think thematically it works, but I understand why people think that he could have used more screen time. I definitely agree, especially because he's presumed dead after a certain point in part 1. And then of course it is a shock to the player when he shows up in the underground. And actually it's in the opening cinematic, which, you know, anime openings infamous for spoiling things, so to speak. I never really had an issue with that. I just enjoy seeing, and it's like, oh, how are we going to get to this point? But with Aizawa versus Saejima, you can't see Aizawa's face, and so I thought it was Kiryu, because you can't really get like a good glimpse of him. I assumed that it was Kiryu and Saejima battling, because like that was a thing in 4 also, which we didn't know. That's like a big deal. The fact that players had played as Kiryu exclusively up to that point, and then all of a sudden you're fighting against Kiryu is pretty neat.
Definitely one of the big highlights of the series, absolutely.
For sure. Back to 5. We didn't even talk about the combat. I totally didn't double back to that. I think this is the best combat in any of the games that we are talking about today. Even better than 0 and Kiwami, which came after. There's something about the way this game feels. It's a great balance of like being punchy and responsive.
It is the culmination of what the series was building up to at that point, and I don't think it's been surpassed.
I'm kind of surprised that even having gone back to 0 and Kiwami at least briefly to do some side stuff, still feeling like 5 has better combat. The extreme heat stuff here is different. It's not like, you know, a superpower, Super Saiyan mode kind of deal. It's really just like Akiyama kicks guys in the air and you can kind of juggle them around and stuff, and Saejima can swing guys around, knocking other people over and then like throw them. The different follow-up heat actions, like Saejima slamming someone into the ground and then doing a heat action on them, like the context sensitive ones. Face grating is very funny and very painful looking, but you know, Kiryu doing that. Shinada with the weapons. I will say Shinada is probably the one that I didn't quite come to full grips with combat wise, but it is a very distinct and unique style there. I fucking love the combat in this game, and I really like love a lot about this game just overall. Like this is my favorite one.
Yakuza 5 had a lot of issues trying to like get out of the door, but but the game had finally came out. It was well received. And, at that point, people thought we were done. It was in a position where it could have very well been the last game. Obviously, that was nowhere near the case. If you want to say that Yakuza 5 could have been like a really great endpoint for the series, it totally is, especially, the theme about dreams, what you do to sacrifice your dreams or what you do to withhold your dreams, make your dreams come true and all this stuff. Like every character has this, and it's so cool. Like, because you have all these different things. You have Watase bowing down to Akiyama. Like, bro, we respect you so much. We owed you a life debt. Nobody should hate Baba at all. Honestly, Aizawa's pretty fucking cool, man. Aizawa's whole deal, wanting to be the strongest, fight the strongest, kind of taking on the whole thing of like, oh, I'll be the Tojo chairman to kind of like bring back things to its former glory. The culmination of Kiryu's past all coming back. Most of the other games don't really make me feel this way just yet. I would say between 5 and 7, this is just such a great game all around. The characters, story, gameplay. This is a damn near perfect game for me.
It's the one that has it all. Usually for me, I enjoy and even love a lot of different game series and franchises. Usually once I've experienced most of the games, it's like it really does boil down to at least a handful, if not maybe 1 or 2 games in said series that are like that game for that series. And with the Yakuza, I was enjoying them for what they are and enjoying my time with them, but I was ultimately kind of looking and waiting for that game with this series. I thought 4 maybe could have been it, but then when I played 5, I like knew.
Which is saying something, because 4 is still one of the best games too.
4 ranks pretty highly for me as well. Just to say it again, like I think Aizawa, I understand like the gripe people have with him kind of being an asshole and kind of like, well, you're actually kind of being handed the chairmanship because Kurosawa is your dad and like he's making this deal with connecting the Omi to the Tojo and shit. But like Kurosawa's a bad dude. He plays everybody in this game like a goddamn fiddle. It's so satisfying in a sense to like realize that, but also satisfying when he gets taken down. Daigo pulls up like injured, I think, and then he like shoots the mooks and then like gets Kurosawa to surrender, at least temporarily, even though things were set in motion with Baba set to assassinate Haruka. And then he ultimately doesn't. And then Shinada's like, hey, you shouldn't be up here. It's kind of a stupid justification, but I love Shinada's goofiness, and his love for baseball leads him to fight Baba, which is like so fitting.
I know we didn't talk about Haruka too much, but like Haruka's great in this game, man. Like her being the 5th main character and going through her struggles, by the end her realizing she's not going to sacrifice her love for her father, and her not being able to live a life with him, and accepting the social backlash of her connection with a Yakuza all the way up to the end. She just says, guys, I'm quitting because I'm going back to be with my father, whose name is Kazuma Kiryu. She runs out of that fucking Coliseum, and then like one of the most beautiful moments in the entire fucking series where she finds Kiryu battered, beaten. He doesn't know if he's dreaming, if he's seeing Haruka, even though like technically we all know he's alive and she's actually there, and it's just like they're finally reunited after all of it, and it's so fucking beautiful. It's so good.
I straight up cried at the ending. Not even necessarily that Kiryu was gonna die, but just like Haruka's speech. It fucking hit me in the feels so fucking hard. Especially the fact that I can't think of a time where she said Kiryu's name until this moment. Like I don't know if she actually has ever called him by his name. It's usually Oji-san, Uncle Kaz. This kind of goes back to what I was saying about remakes, where it's like you can, if you want to, take Yakuza 5 as the ending. If you want to not necessarily stop there, but like you can kind of encapsulate the first 5 games and be like, all right, that's the end of an arc, and if we want to continue it with 6 and on, fine. I don't really have much of a problem taking 5 as kind of its own thing, even if it is part of a greater whole. And that's the thing when it comes to this game too. Like I think it's the best one. It's my favorite. It is like the culmination of everything narratively, gameplay wise, etc. But it's also one that I would not in any circumstance recommend starting with Yakuza 5. It won't have the same impact. It could maybe still hit you, it could still be fun, but like it won't be the same, I don't think. And I think that's also part of the reason why if I replayed 0 now with all this context, I would probably enjoy that even more than I did. Now moving on to Yakuza 6.
At least on the gameplay front, we're going from one of the best Yakuza games to one of the worst Yakuza games. I'm not saying on the narrative front, but on the gameplay front.
Yeah, I'll have my 2 cents on the narrative in a few minutes. When it comes to gameplay, yeah, it's basically like what we said for Kiwami 2, but it's just even less refined.
I have nothing to say on the combat for 6. It is the Dragon Engine. It's Kiwami 2, but worse. I'm leaving it there.
We'll just move on from that. The orbs are just as bad here, maybe worse. As far as the narrative is concerned, I do think that Onomichi is an interesting setting. Obviously, Hiroshima is like a very historically relevant city in Japan, and so the fact that they chose to show this section of it that, you know, it's still being built back up after World War II, and like there's a lot of World War II kind of callbacks as far as Japan's previous militarism and their kind of demilitarism. That's kind of like a running theme, which I think in some sense went over my head a little bit to an extent, just because I'm not as familiar with the aftermath and all that kind of stuff. And the fact that the secret of Onomichi was, spoiler alert, a second warship, and that's like a big deal because Japan demilitarized and all that. I don't really want to get into like the political, racial tension kinds of things that are in 6 because I just don't feel like I'm educated enough to speak on them.
Yeah, I'm not either. And that's not even just 6. There's a lot of social and political undertones throughout these games that you could really dig into.
You definitely could, and I respect people who have taken the time and effort to like do that. I'd be interested to learn more about it, but I just don't really feel comfortable speaking about it. That's something to kind of do your own research on, so I'm gonna leave that at that.
Which is fair, because I mean, this is actual pretty heavy stuff.
Of course, Kamurocho is also present here as well, and the turf war that's going on there, and all of the different strings that are being pulled. Nagumo I found to be pretty grating. It almost felt like they were trying to repeat Rikia, but it didn't work at all, in my opinion. Gyuta is definitely the most fleshed out for good reason, and I think he is an interesting character to an extent, but this game feels very disconnected for being a finale for Kiryu. 5 feels way more like a finale for Kiryu, and he's only like 1/5 of that game. As an individual story, self-contained, it has its moments, it builds up fine. I think that the twist of the Secret of Onomichi would have hit harder if I had thought about the historical context and all that. If I was Japanese, I think that that would obviously be probably a heavier moment. I can't feel sympathy for Hirose because he literally killed like his closest friends and everything for a secret he didn't know what it was, and it ended up just being a fucking battleship. And so I'm like, man, you killed how many people for this? Really? And you're like in your 80s? I feel bad for Nagumo and friends because like they actually cared for Hirose. But yeah, like Nagumo taking his ski mask off after going into the sauna, dumb. Hirose killing all his friends and family or whatever the fuck for the sake of a secret he didn't know what it was, dumb. Oh god, I forget his name. The head of that like shipping company or whatever, the guy who basically runs Onomichi, his fucking son who's like playing dress up in the Yakuza where it's like, look dad, I got a tattoo. It's not a phase. Dude looks like he could be the fucking president of a fucking gaming company. And then you're telling me that this guy is like an actual Yakuza? No.
That's Kiryu's final, air quotes, antagonist.
I think genuinely my least favorite antagonist in any of these games, and it's not close, and there's been some half-baked guys that I've talked about earlier, not to this extent though. And then you got like Daidoji, who is really the one pulling the strings. I'm just like, dude, seriously, this decrepit guy who's literally on his deathbed is like the one who is pulling the strings, and then this wannabe Yakuza who gets a tattoo like he's actually real shit is your main antagonist for Kiryu's final game. To some people, Somaya is kind of the saving grace for the antagonist, but like honestly, I thought he was cooler when I thought he was on Kiryu's side, and then he switches sides again. He teams up with Kiryu briefly when you go to Shangri-La, and then you have like the BDSM enemies, the fucking gimp suit guys that look like they're out of Resident Evil or something. There's just like weird shit in Yakuza 6 where I'm like, what are we doing?
Unfortunately, Akiyama and Date don't get to show up too much. I will say this because, you know, there's the whole thing about like the final story should feel a bit more bombastic. Other characters should feel more involved. Like the OGs should all feel more involved. That's how I originally felt too with Yakuza 6 a long time ago. Now, I have kind of mellowed out on it a little bit because for the most part, it already kind of has been done. Their stories are kind of finished. This final story is more centric around Kiryu and Haruka. Kiryu is essentially a granddad now. Haruka is now at the point where she's an adult.
Some people really take umbrage with Haruka's characterization in this game, but I'm also like, what characterization? She's barely in it.
That is completely fair because she is in a coma for the majority of the game.
Yeah, and she had her arc in 5 already. And also, like, she's a teenage girl. Yes, she's gonna make dumb decisions because she's a fucking child. And like, especially with her traumatic past and the way she felt after Yakuza 5's ending, kind of the repercussions of that going into the beginning of 6 and exploring that. It's not to say that I didn't enjoy this game's story at all. The first half, I was invested and I was like interested, giving it the benefit of the doubt. I didn't like hate it or anything. When the gimp suit guy showed up in Shangri-La, I was like, what the fuck is this? Total tonal whiplash. Like, why is this in a Yakuza game? There's some crazy shit, but that's more so relegated to the side content. And then you have these guys who are basically like super mutants or some shit. There's just so many moments that just really fall flat to me. Like even Somaya killing himself. Kiyomi ends up living, thankfully, because that would have been felt really contrived if she was really shot when the TV turns off. But like Somaya stabbing himself, I don't feel sympathy for this guy like at all. He's a shitbag. I just really kind of disliked a lot of components to Yakuza 6. It doesn't help that the gameplay and the progression are dog ass, just like Kiwami 2. But at least Kiwami 2 has a good story.
Now, I will say, to kind of cap all this off, the actual ending of Yakuza 6, it's almost like a recreation of what happens at the end of the first game. Kiryu, pretty similarly to Saejima in Yakuza 4, where he's like, I have nothing else to live for. He lost Nishiki and Yumi and everybody. He's like, I have no one else in my life. I'm done. I'm taking myself in. And Date's like, you do have someone. She's right there. It's almost kind of like a recreation of this again. Kiryu's going to take this deal and he's never going to fucking see his family ever again. Haruto's taking his first steps. It goes along with Kiryu walking away. The entire ending segment is really good for Yakuza 6.
I actually didn't hate the ending in particular. I think it may be a little bit weaker than it otherwise would have been because of the shitty parts beforehand. I think I prefer Yakuza 5's approach to like an ending than 6's, keeping it ambiguous and kind of just being like, all right, let's move on to a different character. Kiryu doesn't show show up again, whether he's alive or not doesn't necessarily matter, but that's not the angle they went, so oh well. Coming off of Yakuza 6, I do have some concerns going forward, particularly, I would say the combat, except for the fact that the main series is turn-based now, so it's different.
Yeah, the only thing you're going to come across as far as action games is Judgment, Lost Judgment, The Man Who Erased His Name, Ishin, and the Pirate Majima game, and Fist of the North Star, but unfortunately you won't have access to that one.
My main concerns, honestly, are really with storytelling. I know people really love 7's story, so at least that's something I look forward to. 8 is a little bit contentious from what I've heard. I know you weren't that hot on 8's narrative.
There are definitely some narrative issues for me, and that more so comes from what's happened retroactively with the series, as well as some writing and pacing issues with 8 too.
I'll have to figure out what I want to do video-wise going forward. It's possible that I hold on to some of these things for a future discussion on a larger bulk of the Dragon Engine games. I'll have to play it by ear, because I think this kind of podcasty collaborative style sort of worked out well. But I will say that I will be slowing down the pace at which I'm playing these games. Like, I played 7 of them last year. That's like most of what I was playing besides what I talked about on the channel. This year, and really just going forward, there's fewer games for me to catch up on, so I don't think I need to sweat it.
But even then, for you to play like 7 Yakuza games, you literally knocked out the majority of the fucking series.
Exactly, and it's nice to be in that spot. I guess this is kind of anti what I said at the very beginning about not feeling pressure to catch up, but it's not really why I played. It's just more like I was just itching for more. It really is just taking the series for what it is and enjoying it for all of its ups and downs and all arounds. Why don't you let the people at home know where they can find you?
Of course, so you guys can find me right here. My name, Space Cowboy EXE. Search it up like that, kind of like Mega Man EXE. I do have more gameplay-centric styles of videos on my channel, so I do a lot of Mega Man Battle Network-centric videos. I'm also starting to get back into some Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. We'll see how that goes. I'll also have like discussion-based things, but mostly single-player-centric discussions and gameplay videos and all that stuff. So if you want to give me a watch, go ahead and click on the link in the description. Definitely watch the video, give me a shot, and if you like me enough, go ahead and sub to me. Only if you really enjoy my stuff and you think I'm interesting enough for y'all.
Yeah, go check out his channel, guys. He's been killing it lately, especially with the Battle Network PvP content is very fun. I'll have to catch up as far as like actually participating in that, and we'll have to net battle one of these days. Shout out to my channel members, of course. Space Cowboy EXE is here in the room, so shout out to you, man, for showing your support for so long. Appreciate it. Shout out to all of my other members as well. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, of course, if you enjoy, and I will catch you guys in the next video.